Give me the folder, Simone, and by morning this can still be nothing. If I broke a rule, write down which rule. You were asked to reconcile expenses, not investigate people who do not report to you.
Nobody touches that folder until we know what this is.
She removed confidential records from the office.
Preserve tonight's files and access logs. Nothing gets deleted or moved.
Photograph the seal and write down who opens it.
Give me the folder, Simone, and by morning this can still be nothing, Celeste said, so quietly that Nathan stopped before the service door had fully opened. It was 10:52 on a bitter Boston night, the last charity guests gone from his Back Bay townhouse, and Nathan had returned from the car only because his phone was still charging in the library. Simone stood beneath the hallway sconce in the black uniform she had worn all evening, one hand pressed around a Navy accounting folder, while Celeste faced her in the silver gown that had made donors call her gracious less than an hour earlier. The contrast would have looked almost ordinary to anyone passing through, which was exactly what unsettled Nathan, because no one was shouting and no one had to. Celeste controlled staff schedules, references, foundation access, and most of the decisions Nathan had stopped noticing once he trusted her to make them. Simone had none of those things, yet she was the one refusing to move. If I broke a rule, write down which rule, Simone said, keeping her voice level even as Celeste stepped closer. And tell me why you need this folder tonight instead of tomorrow morning. Celeste's mouth tightened, and for a moment the polished expression Nathan knew from board dinners vanished. You were asked to reconcile expenses, not investigate people who do not report to you. Nathan saw Simone glance toward the narrow glass panel beside the door, and he realized she had already noticed his shadow there. That recognition stripped away the last excuse he had for waiting, because another 5 seconds would not make him more informed, only more comfortable. He opened the door and said, "Nobody touches that folder until we know what this is." Celeste turned first, irritation passing through her face before surprise could settle. "Nathan." She removed confidential records from the office. Simone said nothing, and Nathan was grateful because any defense from her would have allowed him to pretend the scene was merely a disagreement he could mediate. He called the household security manager and ordered the administrative drives frozen, the hallway footage preserved, and every access log from the evening copied before anyone left the building. When he reached for the folder, Simone held it 1 second longer than politeness required. "Photograph the seal and write down who opens it," she said. Nathan nodded, and only then did she let go. 20 minutes later, the folder lay on the dining room table beneath a single lamp, while sleet tapped against the tall windows. The first invoices were harmless enough: florists, valet staff, kitchen rentals, temporary servers, until Nathan found one from Halcyon Risk Advisory dated 3 weeks earlier. He knew the firm because 6 months before, a confidential wedding guest list had reached a gossip site, and he had authorized Halcyon to find the leak. They had identified a temporary contractor who sold the list, the matter had ended without a permanent employee being accused, and Nathan remembered praising Celeste for handling it cleanly. What he did not remember was authorizing Halcyon to continue. The invoice description read, "Behavioral Exposure Review," followed by initials instead of names. Nathan turned another page, then another, and each one made the room feel smaller. MS appeared twice beside risk notes and an employment recommendation. And when he asked who it was, Simone answered, "Maribel Santos." Nathan knew Maribel well enough to know the cinnamon rolls she baked on Christmas morning, and not well enough to know why she had been fired after nearly 8 years in his home. He had been told she was dishonest, accepted the explanation, and gone to a meeting. Simone explained that Maribel called her afterward because no one would say what she had supposedly lied about. Then 3 weeks later, Simone found the Halcyon invoice during a routine reconciliation. "I didn't know she was innocent," Simone said. "I still don't know everything, but I know the file was written like somebody had decided before asking her." Celeste folded her arms and looked at Nathan rather than Simone. "We had a serious privacy breach, and you told me to make sure it never happened again." Nathan remembered saying those exact words while boarding a flight to New York, irritated that the leak had consumed half his week. "I meant secure the house," he said. "I did secure the house." Celeste's answer came without hesitation. "People are the house's vulnerabilities." The sentence landed badly, though Nathan could not yet explain why. Simone looked down at the table, as if hearing something she had already suspected, but had hoped not to hear spoken aloud. The security manager entered, before anyone could continue, and set a tablet beside Nathan's hand. A staff workstation outside the service office had been reopened at 10:43 with delegated supervisor credentials, 5 minutes after Simone logged out, and the later session accessed Halcyon's restricted archive. Corridor footage showed Celeste entering the service area shortly afterward. Nathan asked whether she had used the terminal, and this time she hesitated before answering. I wanted to know what Simone had seen. Nathan looked from the access log to the woman he planned to marry in 4 months, then back to the Navy folder between them. Whatever had started as a dispute over documents had become something else, because the person demanding the evidence back had already known exactly where to look for it. The next morning, Simone sat in Nathan's library across from an outside attorney, while rain ran down the windows in thin gray sheets. Nathan stayed only long enough to confirm that Celeste would have no role in directing the review, then left when the attorney asked to speak with Simone alone. The first question was why she had cared so much about Maribel's termination, and Simone rejected the flattering answer before it could form. Maribel was not her best friend, Simone said, and she had never believed loyalty proved innocence. What bothered her was simpler. The household told Maribel she had been dishonest, yet the files Simone glimpsed suggested the allegation had never been established. She had seen that kind of gap before. 9 years earlier, while working in hotel operations, Simone reported a supervisor who altered the date on a disciplinary record after an employee challenged him. The hotel corrected the document and thanked Simone for speaking up, which seemed like a clean ending until meetings quietly disappeared from her calendar and a promotion she had been promised went to someone else. Nobody threatened her, and nobody wrote anything that would impress a jury, but managers who once called her dependable began calling her hard to place. Simone eventually left because she understood the message without anyone having to deliver it directly. That experience doesn't prove anything about Celeste, she told the attorney. It's why I noticed. The attorney then opened a restricted Halcyon attachment carrying Simone's initials, and the room changed because this was the part of the story she could not place entirely on someone else. Simone admitted that she had opened the file after seeing her own identifier on the invoice, even though she knew the attachment was outside her authorized access. The report listed attendance reliability, household access, debt exposure, prior workplace disputes, family obligations, and one line that had made her read it twice, prior whistleblower activity, elevated resistance to discretionary authority. She had then searched Maribel's identifier and found a notation stating that the allegation against her was unsubstantiated. Worse, Simone had sent Maribel a screenshot before fear could talk her out of it. When Nathan learned that part, he did not hide his disappointment, and Simone did not ask him to. "You knew it was restricted," he said when they spoke later in the kitchen. "Yes?" Nathan waited, almost expecting the reason to arrive dressed as an excuse, but Simone only added, "I should have found a safer way." She told him Maribel had already lost one interview because a reference from the household described her departure as dishonesty, and Simone could not stand knowing that an unproven accusation was becoming more permanent every time somebody repeated it. Nathan asked whether she would send the screenshot again. Simone looked at him for several seconds and said, "I hope I'd be smarter next time." That afternoon, the first genuinely inconvenient fact emerged, because Halcyon had not begun as a predatory operation invented by Celeste. Its original investigation had been narrow, documented, and correct, and Nathan had signed the engagement himself after the wedding guest list leak. Halcyon traced the breach to a temporary contractor through access logs and payments, then recommended closing the case without accusing permanent staff. Celeste had insisted on that restraint, and Nathan remembered admiring her for it. The problem came 1 month later, when she extended the firm under discretionary security spending and gradually widened its mission from protecting information to evaluating people. She had not hidden the expense, but she had buried its meaning inside ordinary authority Nathan had given her. When he confronted Celeste in his office, she did not deny the extension. She reminded him that reporters had photographed his mother through a private hospital entrance years earlier, that a former employee once sold his father's medical schedule, and that the wedding leak had nearly exposed addresses of donors with security concerns. Nathan understood those memories because some belonged to him too. Celeste said she had spent years watching powerful families discover that privacy disappeared through one frightened, angry, indebted, or resentful person, and she was tired of waiting until damage had already happened. "I was trying to see pressure before pressure became betrayal," she said. For the first time, Nathan heard fear underneath her control. Then he asked why employees who challenged supervisors were being measured alongside financial vulnerability, and Celeste's fear hardened into certainty. Because resentment matters. Nathan asked whether disagreement always meant resentment. No, but you don't know which one it is until something happens. That was the moment the argument stopped being about whether Celeste had good intentions, because Nathan could finally see the premise underneath the system she built. She believed uncertainty itself was dangerous, and the people with the least power were being asked to pay the price for eliminating it. Outside counsel drafted an agreement meant to protect Simone while the review continued, and Nathan almost convinced himself it was generous. It offered paid leave, health coverage, legal expenses, and severance if she chose not to return, while requiring all parties to avoid public statements until the investigation ended. The lawyer called the language routine, and Nathan repeated that word when Simone sat across from him the following morning. She read the document twice, then rested her hand on the page without reaching for the pen. "Routine for who?" she asked. Nathan started to explain that silence would prevent Celeste, the company, or Simone from damaging one another before the facts were known. Simone looked tired rather than angry, which made it harder for him to defend what he had thought was protection. Celeste can be silent for 6 months and still have lawyers, a board, money, and a last name people recognize, she said. "If I'm silent for 6 months while my reference says I took confidential material, that silence becomes my reputation." Nathan told her he could personally guarantee a neutral reference, and Simone laughed once, not cruelly, but with disbelief. "That's exactly the problem, Nathan. My future shouldn't depend on whether one powerful man decides I deserve a favor." He stopped talking, because every answer he had prepared now sounded like another version of the same structure. She placed her brass employee key beside the unsigned agreement and told him she was resigning. Nathan warned that leaving could cost her severance, legal coverage, and perhaps any chance of returning if the investigation cleared her. Simone said she understood, though the tremor in her hand betrayed how much the decision frightened her. "I've spent too much of my life waiting for somebody with more authority to decide whether my version of what happened gets to exist," she said. Nathan asked her to reconsider, and this time her composure cracked enough for tears to rise before she blinked them away. "I can't keep working in the same house where I have to wonder what file exists because I asked the wrong question." The cost arrived quickly, and not in a heroic form. 2 weeks later, Simone sat in the parking lot outside a downtown hotel after an interview that had ended the moment she disclosed the confidentiality breach. The recruiter had been polite, almost sympathetic, then explained that their legal department would not approve a management candidate who admitted sharing restricted personnel information. Simone thanked her, walked to her car, and stayed behind the wheel without starting the engine. For the first time since leaving Nathan's house, she wondered whether Celeste had been right about one thing. Rules existed because institutions could not survive if every employee decided personal conscience outranked process. The question frightened her more than unemployment. She called Maribel instead of Nathan. Maribel was working temporary catering shifts and admitted that 2 employers had stopped returning calls after checking her reference, but she did not ask Simone to save her. "I need them to stop saying I lied when they never proved I lied," she said. "That's all." Simone realized then that she had been thinking of the case as a fight over whether she was courageous or reckless, when the more important issue sat inside a woman's employment record and followed her from one locked door to another. She hired Tessa Grant, an employment attorney she could barely afford, and told her not to build a case around making Simone look innocent. Tessa brought in Owen Park, a workplace investigator known for disliking dramatic conclusions, and his first discovery made Simone's story less convenient. Daniel Price, a former household security coordinator, had been reassigned after challenging a donor who tried to enter a restricted residential floor during a fundraiser. Daniel assumed the reassignment came from the confrontation, but Halcyon's report described him as resistant to discretionary exceptions and therefore less adaptable in high-trust environments. Another employee who had requested a schedule change to care for a sick parent had been scored for family pressure, then quietly removed from overnight access. No single decision looked outrageous alone. Together, they suggested that ordinary human complications had become risk markers. Nathan faced consequences of his own when he informed Mercer Lodging's board that the halcyon engagement had expanded under authority he left too broad. Several directors wanted the matter contained as a private household dispute, especially because no lawsuit had yet been filed and no public scandal existed. Nathan refused, and the board chairman asked whether his judgment had become compromised because of Simone. Celeste asked him the same question that evening when she came to collect clothes from the townhouse. Would any of this have mattered so much if she hadn't been the one holding that folder? Nathan could not answer quickly enough to satisfy either of them. Celeste removed her engagement ring and set it on the console by the front door. She told him he had spent years delegating difficult things to people like her, then discovering principles only after he disliked the shape of the result. Nathan did not argue, because part of the accusation was true. He had loved clean outcomes, private solutions, and the luxury of not asking what those solutions cost. When Celeste left, the ring remained under the hallway light, where Simone had stood 2 weeks earlier, and Nathan understood that accountability was beginning to hurt, in ways no policy could absorb for him. Owen's investigation turned when he found an internal halcyon memorandum attached to an old billing chain, and the discovery was disturbing because it did not reveal the obvious conspiracy everyone had learned to expect. The scoring model had never instructed staff to target black employees, women, whistleblowers, or low-income workers, and several categories, including unusual financial pressure and unauthorized access history, had legitimate security uses. What Halcyon's own analysts discovered after 3 months, however, was that their model repeatedly elevated employees who had fewer financial reserves, caregiving burdens, or histories of challenging management decisions. The memo warned that the system could mistake organizational friction for security vulnerability. Celeste had received the warning. Tessa expected Simone to seize on the email, but Simone asked what Celeste wrote back. Owen read the response aloud. Continue monitoring. Unpredictability remains relevant even where causation is unclear. The words were sterile enough to fit inside any corporate archive, yet they changed the room because Celeste had been offered uncertainty and chosen to treat it as danger. Simone did not smile. She remembered the years when managers described her as difficult to place because they could not punish her openly, and she felt the old anger rise with enough force that she had to leave the conference room. In the restroom, she gripped the sink and cried for the first time since resigning. The breakdown embarrassed her because she had built her identity around not giving powerful people the satisfaction of seeing what they had done. Tessa found her several minutes later and did not offer a speech. Simone said she was tired of being the person who had to remain calm so everyone else could recognize that something unfair had happened. She was tired of speaking carefully, documenting perfectly, admitting every flaw first, and knowing that one angry sentence from her could become more memorable than a dozen decisions made by someone above her. Tessa listened until Simone's breathing slowed. Then stop performing this for them, she said. We only need the truth. That truth became personal when Maribel agreed to attend the next meeting herself. Owen showed her the halcyon finding that the leak accusation against her was unsubstantiated, followed by an email sent 3 days later in which Maribel challenged Celeste about staff being questioned regarding debt, family members, and prior workplace complaints. 2 days after that confrontation, Celeste approved her termination for loss of trust, then rejected a neutral reference proposed by Human Resources and authorized language describing dishonesty concerns. Maribel stared at the screen until Nathan asked whether she wanted a break. No, she said. I want her to read it while I'm in the room. Celeste arrived the following week, without counsel at her side, for the first 10 minutes, a condition she had requested herself. Maribel sat opposite her, wearing the white chef's jacket from the temporary job she had worked that morning, and placed a printed copy of the termination record between them. She asked one question. Did you know they hadn't proved I leaked anything when you approved this? Celeste looked at the page, then at Maribel. Yes. The answer landed harder than denial would have. Celeste explained that by then, she believed Maribel's confrontation, anger, and refusal to accept the review process showed that trust had broken down, even if the original accusation remained unresolved. Maribel asked why the reference did not say trust had broken down, then pushed the document toward her. Why does it say dishonesty? Celeste opened her mouth, stopped, and for the first time Nathan saw the distinction she had avoided finally become impossible to manage. Saying Maribel was difficult would have sounded subjective. Saying she was dishonest made the decision look factual. Celeste had chosen the stronger word because stronger words ended arguments. Simone expected rage from Maribel, but what came instead was worse. Maribel said her daughter had asked why she no longer cooked at the Mercer house, and she had spent months answering that sometimes adults lose jobs even when they do not understand why. "I taught my child not to hate you," she told Celeste. "I need you to decide whether you're going to keep teaching everybody else that I'm a liar." Celeste's face changed, though not into instant repentance. She looked cornered, ashamed, and still partly convinced that admitting wrong would erase everything she had been trying to protect. Then Nathan made the choice Celeste had once accused him of avoiding. He said Mercer Lodging would correct Maribel's record immediately, review every halcyon-influenced employment decision, and publish the governance failure even if Celeste refused to participate. He also insisted that his own authorization and lack of oversight appear in the report. Celeste stared at him and asked whether he understood what that admission could do to the company. Nathan said yes. For the first time, the cost of knowing had arrived before the decision, and he chose the decision anyway. The final confrontation took place 3 days later, not in a boardroom, but in Nathan's dining room, because Maribel refused to let her employment history become another problem solved among people who already had power. Celeste arrived with her attorney but asked him to wait in the library, then sat across from Maribel, Simone, Nathan, and Tessa beneath the same lamp that had illuminated the Navy folder months earlier. The corrected reference lay unsigned in front of her. It stated that the accusation against Maribel had not been substantiated, that her termination record had overstated the evidence, and that any prior recipient of the inaccurate reference would receive a written correction. Signing it would not destroy Celeste legally, but it would force her to surrender the version of events she had spent months defending. She asked Maribel whether the correction would actually restore the job she had lost. Maribel said no. Celeste asked whether an apology could repair the humiliation of being treated like a threat in a house where she had worked for 8 years. Again, Maribel said no. "Then what exactly do you want from me?" Celeste asked, and frustration made the question sharper than she intended. Maribel looked down at the unsigned page. "I want the next person who calls about me to hear what happened, not what made your decision easier." Celeste's eyes moved toward Simone, and old resentment surfaced. "And you?" Simone had rehearsed a dozen answers during sleepless nights, most of them elegant enough to sound false now. "I want my own breach left in my record," she said. Celeste looked genuinely surprised. Simone explained that she had opened a restricted file and sent information she was not authorized to send, and she did not want a rewritten history that turned her into someone incapable of making a bad decision. "But I want the record to say why I was looking, what I found, and what the investigation later confirmed." Her voice shook once, then steadied. "Nobody gets a clean version." That sentence broke something open in Celeste, because clean versions had been the foundation of every defense she made. She had wanted Nathan protected from uncertainty, donors protected from exposure, staff screened before anyone caused harm, and employment records written firmly enough that decisions would not be reopened. She told them about being 19 when a tabloid published photographs of her younger sister leaving a rehabilitation clinic after an employee sold the schedule. Her father responded by firing half the domestic staff without evidence, and Celeste had spent years believing his cruelty came from acting too late and knowing too little. She promised herself that if she ever controlled a household, she would find risk before fear turned into chaos. Maribel listened without softening. "That explains you," she said. "It doesn't explain me." Celeste closed her eyes for a moment because the distinction left nowhere to hide. Pain could explain why she wanted certainty, but it could not make Maribel responsible for providing it. Nathan finally understood why every attempt to turn Celeste into a simple villain had felt wrong, because she had built a harmful system out of a wound she considered wisdom. Recognizing that wound did not reduce the harm. It only made the tragedy more recognizably human. Celeste picked up the pen, then stopped before signing. She asked Nathan whether correcting every affected record meant he would still remove her from Foundation leadership. Nathan said yes, because repair and consequence were different obligations. She asked whether he intended to end their engagement regardless of what she signed. Nathan's answer was quieter. That ended when we stopped trusting the same things. Celeste nodded as though she had expected it, signed the correction, and slid it toward Maribel. There was no applause, and no sudden forgiveness. Maribel read the document twice, asked Tessa to confirm that previous employers would receive copies, then folded her hands in her lap as relief arrived without celebration. Celeste signed the broader resolution afterward, agreeing to step away from foundation leadership for a year, undergo outside governance review, and allow every Halcyon-influenced employment decision to be independently reconsidered. Nathan's own failure to limit the contract would appear in the company report, and Simone's confidentiality violation would remain in her file beside language acknowledging that the concerns she raised were later substantiated in significant part. The record would be complicated because the people were complicated. Outside the townhouse, Celeste stopped beside Simone before getting into her car. "I still think what you did was reckless," she said. Simone answered, "Sometimes I think so too." Celeste almost smiled, then looked away. "I thought if I could identify every possible betrayal early enough, nobody could surprise me again." Simone understood the temptation because she had spent years trying to become so careful that nobody could use her mistakes against her. "That kind of safety gets expensive," she said. Celeste looked back toward the house. "Apparently, I kept sending other people the bill." 6 months later, Maribel was hired as executive chef at a private club in Cambridge, after a corrected reference reached 2 employers that had previously rejected her. Daniel returned to his former role, 3 other employees received amended records, and Mercer Lodging created a review process that required managers to distinguish proven misconduct from unresolved concern. Simone, meanwhile, failed another interview before Harborstone Hotels finally asked the question she had been waiting for. What would you do differently now? She said she would preserve evidence, seek outside advice sooner, and never confuse being morally alarmed with being procedurally free. They hired her. 18 months after the night in Nathan's hallway, Simone stood on a stage at a Boston hospitality leadership forum and faced a question she could no longer avoid by choosing better wording. A moderator had asked whether she had ever violated an employer's confidentiality policy, and several hundred people waited while she considered how much of the truth could fit inside a professional answer. Harborstone had promoted her to regional rooms director after she rebuilt reporting systems across 4 properties. Yet the old fear returned immediately. One admitted mistake could still become the only sentence anyone remembered. Simone looked toward the audience and chose not to begin with justification. "Yes," she said, "I did." She explained that she had opened restricted material after discovering evidence that an employment process might be unfair, then shared part of that material with someone directly harmed by it. "I was right that there was a problem," she said, "and wrong to believe urgency meant I could skip every safeguard." She told the audience that the hardest lesson was learning those 2 truths did not cancel each other out. A manager could be responsible for a bad decision without becoming permanently untrustworthy, just as an institution could admit a failure without pretending every person inside it had acted maliciously. The room remained quiet, but it was the attentive kind now. Afterward, Simone stepped from the stage and saw Nathan standing near the rear doors. He had not contacted her privately during the previous year, although she knew Mercer Lodging had completed the reforms because outside auditors published their findings and employees began describing the changes publicly. Nathan had also refused repeated invitations to present himself as the executive who fixed the scandal, insisting that the official report include the fact that his signature created the authority Celeste later expanded. Simone respected that more than she would have respected flowers, apologies, or a beautiful dinner. Accountability became convincing only after it stopped asking to be admired. Nathan waited until Simone finished speaking with 2 young hotel managers before approaching. "You were good up there," he said. Simone raised an eyebrow. That sounded surprised. He laughed, and the awkwardness made him seem more human than the carefully measured man she once worked for. "I meant brave, but I've learned that calling somebody brave can be a convenient way to compliment them for surviving something they shouldn't have had to survive." Simone stared at him for a second, then smiled despite herself. He asked whether she wanted coffee across the street, and nothing in his voice implied that the invitation deserved an answer. Simone looked through the glass doors toward a small cafe glowing against the winter dusk. A year earlier, she would have wondered whether refusing him might affect a reference, a legal matter, or the fragile peace surrounding the investigation. Now Nathan had no authority over her job, no unresolved claim to settle, and nothing left to offer that she could not reject. She let the silence stretch long enough to make that difference real. "1 cup," she said. They crossed Boylston Street, beneath a light snow that melted against the pavement almost as soon as it landed. Nathan did not reach for her elbow when a cab turned too quickly at the intersection, though his hand moved instinctively before he stopped himself, and Simone noticed. Inside the cafe, he asked what table she preferred, and she chose the one beside the window. The ordinariness of the question touched her more than any grand gesture could have. Preference sounded different when nobody possessed the power to turn it into policy. Nathan told her Celeste had returned to limited foundation work after completing her year away, though she no longer supervised employees or security decisions. Maribel had received a written apology and chosen not to respond, and Nathan said nobody had asked her to. Simone was glad because she had grown wary of endings that required injured people to forgive on schedule. Some relationships could improve without becoming close, and some people could change without earning their old place back. Redemption, she had learned, was not restoration by default. When the coffee arrived, Nathan asked whether Simone ever regretted opening the file. She did not answer immediately. "Some nights, yes," she said. "Other nights I regret not asking for help before I thought breaking the rule was the only honest option." Nathan nodded, then admitted he still regretted standing behind the service door long enough for Simone to notice him there. She looked at him carefully. "You came out." Nathan shook his head. Eventually, the word mattered because neither of them was trying to turn improvement into innocence. Simone wrapped both hands around the warm cup and watched snow collect along the window ledge. For years, she had believed dignity meant never letting anyone see her shaken, while Celeste had believed safety meant removing uncertainty before it could become pain, and Nathan had believed fairness meant waiting until he possessed enough facts to avoid making the wrong decision. All three beliefs contained something true, and all three had become dangerous when taken too far. Simone finally understood that character was not proved by never failing, never fearing, or never hesitating. It was proved by what a person did after the record became impossible to clean. Nathan asked whether there might be another coffee someday. Simone looked at him, then at the street beyond the window, where people moved beneath umbrellas through a city that knew nothing about the folder, the investigation, or the months when her future seemed reduced to one mistake. She did not need to answer quickly, and Nathan did not ask again. That freedom was smaller than justice, smaller than vindication, and perhaps more precious than either. Simone smiled, lifted her cup, and said, "Ask me when this one is finished."